Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here and obviously for the funding. It's been really exciting getting the SPRITE funding, and also I've got funding before for a related project. So I was able to sort of use the work again on that as well and to develop it. But our project, as we said there on the screen, it's trust, rights and identity in the metaverse. And this is a project that I have done with Sarah Glinch and Sophie Nightingale. Sarah's from Manchester, I'm from Royal Holloway, and Sophie's from Lancaster. And we all come from different disciplines. So Sophie is psychology, Sarah's computer science, and I'm law. So my work particularly is on human rights, international human rights law, and the philosophy behind law in general. What is the purpose of having law or regulation? I use the word law, meaning it could be laws or the law. People sometimes get a little bit hung up about that, but it doesn't matter to me. The purpose behind having regulation or law at all in the first place, but with a specific focus on human rights and often women's human rights and identity. So it's been great to be able to develop the work that I have originally done in terms of international human rights law, and think a little bit more about the new world, if you like, of the metaverse. And I am going to talk more about really focus on the law side of things today. So I pretty much probably don't need to tell anybody here what the metaverse is, but what we meant by the metaverse in terms of our research is this sort of term referring to a single shared immersive digital world that exists in parallel to our real reality, our physical reality, irrespective of whether we're presently interacting with that immersive world. But the metaverse allows us to experience life in ways that we cannot in the physical world, or perhaps in different ways to what we do experience in the physical world. But there's not just one way that we interact in or with the metaverse, but it's often assumed that augmented and virtual reality devices will take a key role and play a key role, and that individuals will adopt digital representations of themselves, and these become, if you like, their digital identities in the metaverse. So the metaverse and the mechanisms by which we interact it offer very exciting new opportunities for identity formation and presentation, providing what I see as empowering tools for those who struggle to perhaps realize or express aspects of their self-identity in the real world. So there's lots of positive scope for empowerment. But the space also represents new openings for exploitation, for monetary gain through targeted cyber attacks such as phishing and social engineering scams, amongst other things. In addition to direct financial losses, there's obviously reputational losses or reputational risks to brands and creators, harm to individuals and to consumers, harm to workers, and as individuals entitled to legal protection in many other different forms, including legal claims for human rights protection and for criminal and civil liability. So there's much scope here for using the metaverse, and it's already being used, obviously, in healthcare, education, art and design, engineering, and other workplaces. So in PwC's 2022 Metaverse survey of more than 1,000 executives and 5,000 consumers, both groups said that cybersecurity and privacy were the top concerns holding them back from adoption. So a metaverse that can't be trusted will stall progress. But the metaverse also then can allow cybercrime to flare up and create new kinds of cybercrime. So those were the types of issues that we were concerned with in terms of thinking about our project. We had 4 strands to the project. Activity 1 focused on a controlled experiment, which is a bit of a pilot online experiment with participants in an experimental design. And the intention was to follow up with smaller in-person pilot studies to talk about how digital identity presentation is important in the formation of trust. And it is this trust that's likely then to be exploited in future harms. So that was activity one. I'll come back to it slightly, very briefly in a second. Activity two was a review of speculative fiction. Activity three was the Global Justice and Legal Rights Review, which I'll talk about. And activity four is stakeholder engagement and grant development. So activity one, just to very briefly say, that was really the focus of Sarah and Sophie's work on setting up this online experiment and a virtual reality pilot, asking how we can be influenced, perhaps much more by real life faces. What's the difference between text communication? What's the difference between that and avatars? And then also with real life faces. And this does link to deep fakes, which we're also developing, hopefully in our future bid. So there were a series of puzzles and tasks set up within a difficult or impossible puzzle set in there deliberately with an offer of help and a request to share confidential information. And then the experiment was to investigate how much people would share that information in a trustworthy way. And these pictures and photographs were sent out to the people in the experiment. So that was sort of reported a little bit when we did a previous presentation. So I'm going to skip over that to focus really on activity three, but just to briefly mention activity two, which is a speculative fiction review. We selected a number of science fiction novels to look at in more depth and to see really where we could get information that would help think about the risks, but also the empowering way that the metaverse can help us consider different forms of identity and trust. So these things ranged from violence, militarization and murder, social harm, ideas of exclusion and the digital divide and deception. And we're aiming really to develop these in a bigger bid to look at a combination of these science fiction with humanities and literature and law work to analyze which links these disciplines can make together to address social justice and structural oppression. So, as I said, we're going to hopefully develop this into a bigger bid. So really, I'm going to focus today on the activity three, Global Justice and Legal Rights Review and Analysis, which was carried out. And this was sort of my remit, if you like. So I looked at those sort of three different areas. So first of all, civil and political human rights in the international frameworks of international human rights law, and then focused in on specific laws in England and Wales on identity in terms of deceptive identity, deception and mistaken identity, and then tried to think about implications for extended reality and metaverse future identity and how the law that we already have and the existing laws relating to real life, if you like, are and could be used in the metaverse. So I think it's been alluded to and mentioned in some previous speakers' presentations already, that the law is divided up into nation states. Sovereign states create their own laws with their own jurisdictions. So this is a major issue in terms of thinking about regulation and the protection of individuals on the metaverse and in digital identity issues, I think, in general. So human rights law is something which is done at an international level, but the metaverse does offer new opportunities for identity formation and presentation, which is empowering. And I don't want to sort of just forget about that, because I think often the focus is on the harms that the metaverse can do and the harms that the internet and so on can create. But I really think that it's important to think about the international human rights that individuals have by virtue of being human, at a universal level, at a transnational, universal, across all jurisdictions level, through international human rights law and international law and its framework in general. So the metaverse can offer new opportunities for identity formation, and these empowering tools can enable self-identity in different ways. So this interconnects with legal human rights to freedom of conscience and belief, the right to free expression, the right to assemble with others, the right to have a private life, including, as that has been interpreted, a right to your own gender identity and intimacy with others, your right to be free from inhuman and degrading treatment, to feel safe and secure, to have a safe environment in which to live, to feel safe and secure, including in your own home, and also to be free from discrimination. So that many of these rights are listed in these international human rights documents, which are international treaties signed by states with other states. And these are supposed to help then the people within the states that are signing these documents on behalf of them. So most of these rights, though, apart from the freedom to be, the right to be free from inhuman and degrading torture and human and degrading treatment, so the other rights that I've mentioned are largely qualified rights. So that means that they're rights up to a point. So they're subject to exceptions when balanced by the rights and freedoms of others, and national governments can decide where to draw those lines. However, under the international human rights law treaties to which they're signatories, there has to be international supervision of consistent interpretation. So these legal rights contained in those treaties can also then be translated into or also duplicated in states' constitutions, if they have a written constitution, or unwritten constitutions, if there is an unwritten constitution, and also in domestic law in the form of legislation, in the form then also of case law, the law that is interpreted in the courts, if it's a common law jurisdiction, which is the situation in the UK and also, for example, in the United States. So there's many places we can find those rights, and one of the things that I've done is look in detail at the European Convention on Human Rights, to which the UK is still a signatory. It's unrelated to the EU and Brexit in that regard, at least. So the way that identity and these rights have been developed in these different jurisdictions, including in the European human rights sphere, has developed to mean that there's a right to identity, which I'll be coming on to in a second. But all of these principles and all of these rights are underpinned by principles which have legal weight and are said to be universal norms of human rights law, that each person has a right to human dignity and human freedom. And therefore, the international courts, such as the European Court of Human Rights, have to interpret these rights in that consistent way, but in dynamic, ongoing, changing ways as well. So this gives creativity, and I think also that the creativity given by the metaverse fits well with these rights. So just moving on then, in the interest of time, I've thought about identity, so that in terms of a legal definition of identity according to international human rights law. And identity in law is a term used for the different ways in which law explicitly treats people as having some sort of core, stable, or unitary characteristics. Recording information in birth registry documents, for example, in marriage documents, in death documents, on passports. And identity is usually linked to biology, to blood, to genetics. It can also be linked to religion, on sex or gender, sexuality, age, and nationality. And there are legal protections following the so-called natural or biological human. Then a right to persona, which can include a right to protecting your image in certain ways exists in certain legal jurisdictions, but that very much depends on the different jurisdictions. So that it is a case in the United States, but it's often interpreted in slightly different and slightly inconsistent ways by the judges in the courts. But there is a right to persona there. And a right to personal identity has developed out of the right to respect for your private life, which is under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. So there now is a right to respect for one's personal identity. But what exactly that means is quite problematic in a legal form. So sometimes there's a focus on, those core unchangeable, so-called unchangeable characteristics. But as there have been many developments in different ways, some things are no longer unchangeable that were first seen as unchangeable. So that's very interesting in terms of seeing the development of the dynamic jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights in that front. Yet law can also provide rights through legal fictions. So we're not corresponding to natural persons. For example, companies, probably the most obvious example of this, that companies have a separate legal identity and are protected and have legal rights. And I do think that this could hold promise for new forms of virtual identity being legally protected in and of themselves at some point, perhaps in the future. And then existing crimes and harmful behaviour, which is already against the law, including identity-related harms and identity-related harmful behaviour that is against the law, such as theft, identity theft, phishing, romance fraud, will still be covered in the metaverse. But we were sort of looking to see what new and so-called novel harms might arise, such as assault, reputational harm, libel and discrimination in the metaverse. And these have begun to emerge and will no doubt further emerge. So then the issue, I think, with the law in terms of looking at this particular topic is that we as lawyers, both practicing lawyers and in academia, often focus on particular subject matter and content. So we were looking at tort law, contract law, on human rights law. So we have to think what ways they can be protected in the virtual world. So of course, human rights do exist in the virtual world. There's real life people operating the avatar and whatever the machinery and the technology is. And they have a right to feel safe and secure. They have a right to be free from discrimination and so on. And the starting point is then to look at that and to see, yes, but then we have that complication of all the different areas of law that have to be taken into account. And it's not good enough now to say, well, you don't need to go into the metaverse if you don't want to suffer any harms, because that was an argument that was used, about mobile phones and going online and so on. And now we see that, we can hardly exist without them, because not even just because of our own choice, but because of society and society's view of them. So one of the I think we sort of I'm starting characterizing the different categories of different things. So inequality in the use of the technology can create more inequality, and access to the metaverse. This will vary obviously between countries and within them, so there could be increasing digital divides that way. So really regulators and governments need to be alert to the human rights and equality in the metaverse through engagement, accepting accountability and ownership over the issues, but not leave it to private entities to be doing this. But the governments themselves need to be trusted, and we need to be aware of the development of deep fakes and so on. So this is one of the things that I think international human rights law can provide: a strong existing framework, including guiding principles for business and human rights, which already exist. And at the UN level, the different UN bodies are now looking into neurotechnology, neuro rights, and also linking to EU Commission work on the metaverse as well. So I think there's lots of different things there that could be looked into in further detail. But the problem with international human rights law for many people is that it can end up being a new imperialism. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, and need to take into account all the voices of different regions and cultures and peoples. So just in the interest of time, I'm just going to finish there. And we've had quite a few meetings, and we met to discuss how to form this into a bigger project and to put in a bigger bid. So that's what we're currently working on at the minute, and writing more of our material. Thanks.